Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. For me, the main features of informal warfare or new wars today are that we are contending with a multiplicity of definitions here: hybrid warfare, asymmetrical warfare, unconventional warfare, low-intensity warfare, and above all, prolonged conflicts, the type that do not seem to have any kind of end to them, and nobody really wants ceasefires. So we're looking at this kind of a scenario in which increasingly things like trade, technology, and even tenets, as in narratives, that is to say, systems of governance, whether social, political, cultural, or economic, are increasingly being weaponized. So we are looking at this complex scenario in which I also see a fusion of state and non-state actors. In the case of state actors, I see an increasing tendency to use conventional and non-conventional means. So it's a very, very complex situation, and all recent wars have, to some extent, exhibited these qualities, including the extensive use of cheap, asymmetrical means to bridge absolute gaps in military power, as we saw in the case of Hamas's rockets, for example, or the drones that have been used so far. So we can expect this situation to continue with also an increasing blend of other aspects that are around us, that is the use of cyber power and increasing use of artificial intelligence. And I feel that in artificial intelligence, you are now looking at a super spreader of misinformation, which will also impinge on military decisions. Facial recognition will mean that commanders on the battlefield will be identified individually, perhaps taken out individually in order to impact on the morale of troops. And I think that is something that we must keep in mind. But there are some silver linings to this, like natural language processing capabilities of AI. For me, I see a possibility to create soldier support systems, translation systems, which can also help confidence-building measures, for example, in face-to-face situations or situations involving prolonged face-offs. But I can elaborate on this as we go down the line. Thank you.
Well, of course, drones have also come into play when we look at the return, in a sense, in the return of proxy wars. And Ambassador, I wanted to ask you, we've seen with Iran supplying drones to the Houthi as an example of that. Russia, similarly, has been known to use proxies to further their aims and expand influence. So, Ambassador, what are the consequences with these sorts of tactics, using these sorts of tactics? What are the consequences on global security more broadly? And are we seeing a return of the proxy wars?
So let me begin by saying that drones, in fact, have become a very potent object in the hands of belligerents. And we have seen the use of drones in all the recent conflicts, beginning with the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, but more recently, the use of the Samad-1 drone produced by Iran. We have seen that in the hands of the Russians as well. These have been known to take out, for example, tanks, as we have seen when Ukraine used drones against Russian tanks. In the case of Hamas, they used drones, cheap drones, to drop ordnance on what you call ISR capabilities and watchtowers along the Israel-Gaza border. And this therefore takes you into a totally new realm when combined with armed UAVs. For example, the Houthis possess the Asif and Tufan missiles, which have a long range. They have drones which have a long range. And so where does that leave things like arms control treaties? The MTCR, for example, in my view, is completely dead as a dodo right now, because these technologies have become fungible. They are being proliferated. And it also leads to the question as to what is happening with the NPT in general, or the other treaties like the New START Treaty, the INF and the ABM are gone. So what does that mean for the future of warfare? And I think it's particularly relevant to keep in mind that non-state actors, when they possess territory, they become even more potent. We have seen the case of the Hezbollah in Lebanon. When they acquire territory and have influence over the local people, they are much harder to get rid of or to deal with. The Houthis have done the same thing in Yemen. We've seen Hamas do that in Gaza. And there are other examples of the ISIS in both Iraq and Syria, and more relevantly, the recent example of the Taliban in Afghanistan. So remember that a non-state actor in possession of territory is much harder to get rid of. And such a belligerent will always use cheaper means like drones, homemade garage-made rockets to overwhelm the adversary. But may I also say very briefly here that this is an era of informal warfare in which private players, the private internet, private individuals like Elon Musk, for example, with his Starlink, are beginning to have a say in the conduct of warfare and also in outcomes. So we are looking at that. On the other hand, there is the advent of NGOs, civil society, the youth, and transnational constituencies that do not agree with their own governments in regard to their views regarding a certain adversary. And they are beginning to have a say in the conduct of informal warfare and outcomes as well. So I think these are important to keep in mind.
Look, our panellists have given us so much food for thought to now open it up to the floor, and I'm pleased that we have a little bit of time to be able to do that. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and I'm actually going to ask you to state your name, but also I will start with the Raisina Young Fellows and then see how we go for time with anyone else. So, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Samuel Bashfield from the Australia India Institute and also part of this very esteemed Raisina Young Fellows program. So I want to pick up on one theme that's been brought up in this conversation, which is critical infrastructure that transits the seabed. Now, of course, this is not only submarine data cables, but also gas pipelines, electricity cables, and infrastructure associated with offshore renewable energy connections. And these are the so-called seabed lines of communication. So my question is, I'd really value any reflections on how the seabed protection interacts in this new era of new wars. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ambassador.
Could I just say that an informal warfare has already begun with regard to deep seabed mining and undersea resources, thermal vents, polymetallic nodules, etc. And we can see that in the Pacific, in the northern Pacific and the Clarion-Clipperton zone, there are a number of players there, including the Chinese with Comra. In the Indian Ocean, we see that the scrimmage is now shifting towards the acreage given by the International Seabed Authority of the Rodrigues Ridge in the Indian Ocean. And the important thing here is that a country like the United States of America is not even a member of the International Seabed Alliance, the International Seabed Authority. And so therefore, it gives an opportunity to certain countries, you know who I'm referring to actually influence the International Seabed Authority, its workshops, its funding, its meetings. And you now have countries like Nauru, which has just switched allegiance from Taiwan to the People's Republic, clamoring for completing the regulatory norms within a short time. And who will then contribute to this rule-making is the question. So I think many more countries need to take interest in the making of norms for seabed resources, and notably the United States of America.
Thank you, General. And on that note, I am going to ask you to join me in thanking our panel. It's been a very informative discussion. And thank you to ORF and MEA for hosting us for this important panel discussion. Thank you.